Okay, let's start. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of the Road Safety Awareness Month's webinar series. In the last session, we were having a discussion with both Pedro Oman from Polis and Fred, the CTO of Vianova, looking into how we can make information, new innovation accessible for cities and governments for them to take better decisions. And based on that, we're taking today a deeper look, a deep dive into the question, what data is out there in the world? And this question will be discussed with two experts, of which one is Tobias Miethaner, the Managing Director of Mobility Data Space. Tobias is the spokesperson of the mobility data space and responsible for the recruitment of new participants and the so-called community management. Tobias also holds a doctorate in law and has extensive experience in the field of digitalization, infrastructure, and mobility, thanks to his experience from the Federal Ministry of Digital and Transport, and also quite interesting, in his work in the Directorate General for Digital Connectivity, Tobias, you have been involved in data policy and also developing the legal framework for highly automated autonomous driving. So welcome on board and hello, Tobias. And on the other side of today's webinar, I'm happy to welcome Thibault Castagne. Thibault is the CEO of Vianova. Thibault is a serial entrepreneur in the field of transportation and energy. He's a former financial engineer from HSBC and a portfolio manager at a leading energy hedge fund. And on top, he holds an engineering degree from INSA London, INSA Lyon, and the University of Illinois, and a Master of Renewable Energy Management from the University of St. Gallen. So welcome, Thibault, welcome on board. And with this being said, I would like you, Tobias, to start with your presentation.
Thanks very much, Markus, and thanks also for the invitation. Warm welcome also from my side. And I will start with a short presentation of the mobility data space, what we are actually doing. So to put it in a nutshell, the mobility data space is an independent virtual marketplace for the exchange of mobility data. So what we are doing is to provide for a data space for a voluntary exchange of mobility data. So we are not at the first place a company which has to do with data obligation provisions. So in the end, it's about also commercial use of data. But on the same hand, we are also in a good in a deep exchange with municipalities, who of course also have open data. And what's our aim? Our aim is to foster data sharing to evolve innovative mobility solutions. And we think that there's still a lot of potential which is not tapped up to date. We know that 17% of the German enterprises are sharing their data at the moment. And of course, there's still a lot of potential that we can tap to create new mobility innovations. What is the speciality of the mobility data space? We are not a platform. We do not have data, but we are a data space. So the core principle on which we are based is the principle of data sovereignty. We offer an IT infrastructure, so-called connector, which allows for a decentral data exchange. And that's something which is very important for our customers, for the enterprises, also the municipalities, to have a data sovereignty at all times and not to be obliged to give away the data as soon as you're part of the data space. And the second function that we are offering is the broker function. So in our platform, those who want to share data find the one who offer data. And it's not only the broker function that we have, but we are also doing matchmaking on an individual basis. So we bring together actively those who have data and those who are looking for data. Let's have a look on our community. At the beginning of this year, we had a little bit more than 60 participants. And as you see by today, we have more than 150 participants in the mobility data space. So you see there's a really dynamic development in the mobility data space. I think what we can say is that we have a very diverse community. So we have, for example, of course, the big OEMs like Mercedes, BMW, or VW, who are also shareholders of the mobility data space. And we also have Deutsche Bahn, so the German railway, as a mobility service provider in our membership. But there are also very small companies and startups. You see them here like Ladeplan and so on. So it's not the big companies as such, but it's also the startups and also municipalities that are part of our network. We also have German enterprises, of course, but also more and more enterprises from out of Germany. At the moment, we have 20% of the members from abroad. And we also see that it's not only the automotive sector that is part of the mobility data space. If you have a look on the screen, you also see that we have insurance companies like Hook, so the biggest German insurance, also shareholder, not only participant of the MDS. We have the energy industry with us. And also very important, we have public authorities as members, but also as shareholders. So we have 3 Bundesländer, Bavaria, North Rhine-Westphalia, and Baden-Württemberg, and also authorities like the German Weather Forecast Service. Weather data is really a big deal in the mobility data space. We have many participants who are interested in this kind of data. And we, for example, do also have the German highway company as a participant in the mobility data space. So it's also private and public sector that are participating. If you have a look at our data, I can recommend to have a look at our homepage. There you can see the data categories that we offer. And it's a broad range, starting from vehicle and telematics data. We have roadworks and road conditions data, traffic data, parking lot information, also data on electromobility, traffic signs. As I said, weather data as well. So it's not only mobility data, but mobility relevant data. I'd like to mention mobility communication companies who also provide their data at the mobility data space. And final other categories are public transport, car and bike sharing, and infrastructure. So a very broad field in which we are offering data. And if you have a closer look at our homepage, you can also see the subcategories and some description of the data that we have. So you can even get a closer idea of the data that we have. So I think that's it in a nutshell. And I'd like to hand over to you, Markus or Thibault. I don't know who of you does want to take over.
Thank you very much. For everyone who's participating, if there is questions on your side, please paste them into the chat function. And meanwhile, Tobias, maybe a few questions from my side. So what are like the biggest potentials that you see coming from the data in the mobility data space? And what are like the data sets or the information that customers coming to mobility data space asking most for?
Well, I want to start with the latter one. At the moment, we see that indeed the sensor data of the car manufacturers are those one where we see really a big request of our customers. For example, BMW offers data on slippery roads. These are data that are very much requested. We also have data of wipers, for example. So there is a startup who's interested in these data just to know when and where, especially where at the moment you have heavy rain, and that helps them for the prediction of rain shots. So this is in the end an application which is not actually in a narrow sense of mobility, but you see that the sensor data also help in many different sectors. Heavy braking incidents is also a data category of the OEMs, which is very much where many of our participants are interested in. And we also have the insurances who are interested in the way that the drivers and the keepers of the car act. So that helps them for their pay how you drive tariffs. So in the end, I think we can say that the sensor data of the car makers are the one which are really in the very much looked at. And so I think that's the most important field of data that we have. And I think, Markus, maybe you can repeat the first question that you posed.
Like the first question was just, what are the main potentials that you see coming from these data? And maybe just to also reference to what you already said, what are the use cases that people asking for the sensory data from OEMs? What is your opinion or your impression, what they're trying to achieve as a use case with this data?
I think you can look at your question from different angles. So if you come from the question, what is the most important improvement for society, then I think there's a lot of potential, of course, in the data on traffic safety. I just mentioned some of these categories which are relevant. On the other hand, of course, you have data where you have lots of real-time traffic, which is very important or interesting from an economic perspective. I mentioned the case of the insurances and the car manufacturers. So that might be a case which has a very big economic implications. But I think from a societal perspective, the real value is in the data which are about, well, road safety. And with regard to the use cases, I think some of them I already mentioned. I've also in mind another use case with the sensor data, which says where exactly and when do we see heavy braking incidents. So the car sensors, of course, realize when there are heavy braking incidents, and then you can localize where exactly these incidents have been. And we are talking with the German highway company, and they of course are very interested in this data, because then they see what are the very dangerous spots where we have to be cautious, and we have to consider to take action. And of course, this not only applies to the highway company, but in the end, you can do that with every municipality, with the federal states, all those entities who have responsibilities on the infrastructure. So this is something which I think is a very interesting case as well. And if we talk about the highway company, then it's a mutual interest. So they are interested in data of the OEMs. On the other side, the OEMs are interested to know when and where are construction sites. So we have intense discussions between these parties. What are the data the one can offer to the other?
Thank you for this input. And I see, Thibault, you have your hand raised. Maybe you want to place a question from your side.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus, and thank you, Tobias. Real pleasure to see you again. I'm interested to know. I have a question actually specifically on the privacy and for the data. So you mentioned several use cases, some that actually could use like anonymized data sets for road safety, and others actually where we would need like specific sort of at the vehicle level driving behavior, for instance, for usage-based insurance. How is it being handled? Are all the data basically already anonymized within the mobility data space, or are some data like at the personal level, and then this is between the two entities to actually like have the sort of the driver consent, or or are in charge of the GDPR compliance? Or...
Yes, that's a very good question, because we see that at the moment we are not only being seen as a player who's very well trustworthy. We are a non-profit company. There are many players of the public side who are involved with us. So this is not only trust with regard to the data transfer side, but also with regard to the involvement of the use cases. So like in the case you mentioned, the pay how you drive case, you have the car manufacturers on the one hand, the insurances on the other hand. And as you said, they have the problem that you have personal data and that you need consent. And the question they pose is, and what we are just trying to clarify, is whether the mobility data space can be the institution where consent management is conducted. So they do not have to have consent on the side of the insurance and on the side of the OEM as well, but you can maybe in future only have one consent management procedure, and that of course will be a big value for all those who are being part of the process. And that's indeed, as I said, a very important aspect. We are a non-profit company, and also the federal government is funding us with 50%. And that's one of the reasons why the market players have trust in our institution and in what we're doing.
Thank you. I think you're on mute, Marcus.
Classic. Thank
Classic.
you. Thanks, Tobias, for your answers. And with this being said, I would like to hand over to you, Thibault, for some more impressions on also what can be done with data from connected cars with regard to road safety for cities and governments.
Sure. We'll share my screen. Can you see it now?
Yes, maybe you can switch to presentation mode.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Beautiful.
Just to I think to come back on the webinar and basically this discussion with Tobias. We met actually with Tobias at the auto show in Munich back in September, and for us it was a great surprise, and it was I think we had some common interests, but for me it was personally, as the CEO of Vianova, was a very great surprise to see like this initiative, and we saw basically the power of this ecosystem, and to come back on Vianova itself. Basically Vianova is a mobility data analytics platform developing solutions for safer and more sustainable mobility, specifically addressing actually cities, governments, and transport authorities. And sort of our bread and butter or core knowledge is essentially transforming connected vehicle data or IoT data from cell phone into insights that would actually allow better planning or generally better management of traffic or mobility, whether this is car traffic or whether this is shared micromobility, taxis or logistics. And the transition basically to road safety kind of like went naturally for us. Already like collaborating with 60 cities across Europe on providing tools basically for regulation and management of shared mobility and shared micromobility. The question of road safety came naturally. And there was more and more incidents basically with the rise of cyclists and micromobility users post-COVID pandemic. And we sort of scratched our head about what we could do actually with our city partners and how we could actually help them to plan basically like safe infrastructure for micromobility, for cyclists, and generally like protect vulnerable road users in cities. And at the same time, I will actually go to the next slide. But at the same time, actually, what happened is we got reached out actually directly by OEMs, automotive OEMs, that we could imagine now basically with connectivity of vehicle. So to give a bit of a figure, like 100% of cars sold in Europe and in the US are meant to be connected basically by next year. Which means basically that increasingly we will have extensive basically connectivity on the fleet or on the vehicles that goes into our cities, and increasingly basically like getting information on that. And sort of interviewing and researching about how we actually are assessing road safety at the moment, we realized that today most European cities, and as a matter of fact, American cities as well, are basically using historical collisions. So historical collisions are basically reported by emergency services or police only actually on fatal, serious injuries or serious basically corporal damage. And essentially basically the way they report the data is very eclectic, depending on the institution or transport authority, and it only represents basically again a very small sample of sort of all the unsafe or near misses that actually happen on the street network. We looked at it at how can we actually move from a reactive approach to road safety to a more proactive approach to road safety, especially because we saw that mobility patterns have changed radically in the last couple of years, not only actually in terms of the modes that we were using with a high increase actually of pedestrian and cyclists, but also in terms of work from home and generally like intra-neighborhood sort of mobility that were not captured before, and just generally like change of mobility during the time of the day or the day of the week, etc. And getting freshness of data and specifically like collecting information basically that can pinpoint near misses was we saw that as a real sort of breakthrough in terms of assessing road safety in cities. And I come back to that as what we know as the sort of the safety pyramid or the safety triangle, which was originally actually made for factory workers in the early 30s, and then expanded to the traffic road safety world by Bird in 1969. And basically like looking at that is, today we are actually not capturing near misses and unsafe acts. We're only capturing actually the sort of the 10 or 1 to 10 serious or fatal crashes but not the 600 to 300,000 unsafe acts. This is where actually OEMs and automotive players basically can play an increasingly important role in improving road safety in cities by providing any sort of information from speeding to braking to steering, or even ADAS information that could even recognize objects through the cameras of the car, to be able to contextualize sort of every near misses that we can capture on the roadway. When we started, we didn't know mobility data space. So we had to create, let's say, also our own marketplace. And the way that we thought about it is that, okay, we have an analytics, transportation analytics product, and we want to make sure that we plug in directly like the marketplace of a lot of providers that will essentially like automatically like upload all the data basically on the analytics to improve the overall experience and make sure that we have a full ingestion process and insights to the analytics platform. And so we actually created the Vianova marketplace, which is, I think, a very sort of good complementary case actually of the mobility data space, because essentially it integrates the data sources themselves into an analytics product. On the marketplace today, you have more than 150 data sources. So you have OEMs, you have telematics providers, which are providing mostly like what we call probe data or floating car data from the likes of Bridgestone or Masternode or Geotab, that are the main sort of telematics provider of the logistics and trucks industry. We have air quality data from DPD, charging infrastructure from Eco Movement, others, telco and GPS data, specifically cell phone data to capture like pedestrian and cyclist flow, as well as micro-mobility or shared mobility information. And increasingly, we want to work with mobility data space to complement basically what we could call the Vianova marketplace that is integrated into the analytics product. Mobility data space do have actually a lot of assets that we're extremely interested in, that was mentioned by Tobias, such as harsh braking, speeding, or traffic information. Just coming back also to why is it important to have this information, and especially basically for road safety experts in cities. We see that road collision is of course a multifactorial event, which means basically is a question of the drivers, the vehicle, the infrastructure, and the overall environment in terms of weather, but also in terms of overall traffic. And we see that infrastructure basically is linked to 30% of the collisions. So as road safety expert or infrastructure planner, there is basically, there are a lot of reasons to improve infrastructure to avoid basically that risk factor into the overall mix of why a collision happened. Of course, there's a lot of prevention to do on drivers, and there's a lot of sort of work to do also on the vehicle safety themselves, as well as improved ADAS system, etc., to prevent traffic. But us as city planners, road safety experts, there's a lot we can do on infrastructure. So Vianova constructed actually what we call the risk score, which essentially it's a statistical measure that would actually assess how risky a road segment is. And it's a statistical measure that will look actually at sort of, couple of months to even 10 years history, and look at and aggregate information about abnormal driving events, such as emergency braking, overspeeding intensity and frequency, overall traffic volume, pedestrian and cyclist flow, historical collisions, road conditions, and any other sort of data sets. This risk scoring basically is a way for cities and transport authorities to automatically rank intersections and road segments by how risky they are, and then zoom in basically at the intersection level to look at every individual sort of abnormal driving event or risk factor, and understand basically how, with this contextualization, how they can actually change the regulation or the infrastructure to improve road safety. And Our role at Vianova essentially is as a data analytics platform, so ingesting this information, standardizing this information so that we can aggregate all these road events into a sub-street segment, and making this available in a user-friendly dashboard, so that road safety experts can quickly basically rank the streets on a monthly or on a quarterly basis, make reports, dive into specifically intersections, send people on the ground to actually verify the assumptions, prioritize intervention, and then measure over time basically the impact of this intervention on the safety, which is a great thing about actually like the connected vehicle data, is that you have freshness of data in real time. So if you actually make a change on the infrastructure or on the traffic regulation, such as limiting speed limit, which is a big case in Europe at the moment in city centers, what are the impacts actually does it have on overall safety and driving events on that road. So this is the road safety that today, the road safety dashboard that we are providing already to half a dozen cities across Europe, and also like one actually in the US, where essentially like you go through the process that I described. This is the workflow today that is being used by our customers. It's important to notice that the risk model basically can be calibrated based on the local priorities. So the weighting of the risk model, as well as the data sources, whether, for instance, we want to include VRU, vulnerable road users density, if we are in an urban environment, or remove them completely if we are more into a rural environment and look at more at the road condition themselves as a higher weight or weather conditions, then we can also make that change. Sort of repeating myself, but I will not do so much. I think the interest here is that it's the richness of the data that we can actually pull from these automotive OEMs. It's reducing the costs from a city perspective. All reporting are automatic. It helps basically prioritizing the intervention and having counting of events, counting of vehicle, reviewing of speed and traffic, fully in real time and through data, not with people counting vehicle basically on the side of the road. You have a very short feedback loop on any intervention that you want to do. And to make some cases, to highlight some cases, Transport for London. So Vianova is the main partner of Transport for London Vision Zero program. And essentially, like, we started by assessing the impact of the 20 miles per hour reduction of the speed into the safety of the streets that were impacted by this speed limit reduction. And what we saw is that we saw actually 25% reduction in collisions, and that actually have a sort of a large impact on the safety of TfL, and looking also at overall, the compliance of vehicles into the speed limit by looking at the distribution and the 85 percentile of the speed, whether vehicles basically are complying or not. As a rule of thumb, information, a vehicle basically that drive at 50 kilometers per hour hitting a pedestrian has a probability of killing this pedestrian of 70%. If you reduce the speed to 30 kilometers per hour, you have a probability of only 10%. So we see basically the impact of speed regulations in city centers that it can have on the overall safety. And with Vianova, you can really assess that impact and check the compliance of citizens to this measure. Another example is Zurich, where we look specifically actually at sort of the high or the risky hotspot for VRUs, and how we could actually improve visibility of cycling lanes, or even more pedestrian crossings, looking at braking events actually close to pedestrian crossings, and providing, more visible signals, and highlighting basically these crossings on the road to avoid basically any sort of further risks. I think that was it for me, Marcus.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your presentation, Thibault. And I would just ask one more question regarding the work of Vianova. And how do you see cities respond to the proposal of Vianova? How do they respond to the idea of using connected vehicles data for their road safety work? What is common answers, common opportunities that they see?
I mean, what we see is that the standard methodology basically that is being used is using historical collisions. So this is something that is being used and that is being backed up basically at the federal level of every country or at the regional level. So this is the standard methodology. So there are some educations to be done and that we're doing to see how this information can complement historical collisions. We're not looking basically here to let's say replace the existing methodology, but how we can complement it in having a more proactive assessment of this road safety. So we see that cities are extremely pleased actually to see that. And generally we see road safety literature and road safety experts actually talking more and more about the capturing of these near misses. And I think it will become a norm as everything, and especially in the public sector, is going to take a bit of time basically to let's say change the methodology overall, but we see a lot of excitement using this among basically like European city or the American peers.
Okay, thank you for that. And maybe one additional question. I think we've seen in the beginning a lot of different data partners, for example, in the mobility data space. What use cases outside of road safety do you see coming from the data available in connected cars?
I would say like this. I mean, the use case that comes a lot to me, which is of high importance to cities at the moment, is logistic flows and curb events. I think most of the cities basically in Europe are completely like blind to what's happening in the freight sector and how this and the use of the public space and the impact of congestion that has basically the logistic and freight sector to the overall like traffic in cities. And so utilizing basically telematics data from these telematic service providers, we can provide basically very accurate measure of the impact of those vehicles into the overall congestion, but also basically having a very precise curb demand or parking demand, or let's say, where they actually park, double parking. And so the impact that it has also on the congestion of that specific streets, the time that they actually park, and even the motorization or the electrification rate, basically, of all these vehicles. So it's very interesting, actually, in the case of Paris, to see that at the moment we have an electrification rate of 18% of the overall logistic and freight fleet. And so when the city actually will adopt this low emission zone, then there's going to be a significant work actually by the logistic providers to electrify their fleets.
Understood. Thank you very much for these insights. And so I think we had a very exciting insight to the world of mobility data today, because Tobias, you gave a very good overview of how big the ecosystem of data providers already is and how much data is becoming more and more accessible, especially from the large OEMs. It was very interesting to see how this data is not only available, but also translated into a concrete use case in road safety, where you leverage this potential to have a more proactive approach on road safety, which was really, really interesting to see. And with this being said, I would like to thank both of you, Tobias and Thibault, for participating in today's webinar. And then I will see you next week, Wednesday, 12:30, at the last session of the Vianova Road Safety Awareness Month, where we will discuss with the Vision Zero architect of the city of Zurich, who will give us a more insight into the concrete data points cities are considering when making infrastructure more safe. So join us next week, and thanks for participating today, and I see you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Tobias.